I'm planting bulbs and it's towards the end of January. Bulbs planting the end of January? Is she mad? I can hear you say. But I think there's some very good reasons for planting bulbs now. Number one, with tulips especially, the squirrels adore them. So the shorter they're in the ground, the better they are. Number two is they get tulip fire disease, which is a type of fungus, and the shorter they're in the ground, then the less likely they are to catch it. And the third one is finance. Now, if you've got deep pockets, it wouldn't worry you. But now, January, there are masses of bulb sales, wholesalers, retails, whatever, and you get bulbs at knockdown prices because if they don't sell them, they'll just tip them. And so I tend to get mine from a wholesaler locally called GT Bulbs, and you'll say they've got masses of sales on. And many contractors, I know, landscape contractors, actually do all their bulb purchasing at that time of year. Now, there are some provisos. Tulips, I think, are particularly good. Alliums are particularly good. But any little bulbs, they do tend to desiccate or dry out. So I tend to plant my snowdrops and things like that earlier. Now, that's not to say when I scroll through the websites of the bulb offers and I see some amazing snowdrops on offer, I probably will buy them and I will plant them, and I might only get a 50% success rate as opposed to 100. But if you're buying them for peanuts, does it really matter? So what I've got this year is obviously when you buy late, you have a much narrower choice. And so I'm planting my tulips here. But before we go into the actual planting of bulbs, I think what a lot of people don't think about with bulbs is design. And really, like with any plant, if you can put a bit of design into how you're laying them out, it makes a huge difference. One of the finest examples I've seen, I think, is at Highgrove, the King Charles's garden, one of his gardens. He's got wide 3-metre circles of bulbs around the base of his trees. And he's used just two types of crocus, the Crocus thomasinias, and they've got Flower Record and Remembrance, and they are both mauve, but one is a light mauve and one is a dark mauve, and he's mixed these two up and planted them densely around the bases of trees all through the meadow, and they look superb. In Japan, we did a big maze of a huge grass area, and we did a maze, a labyrinth type system, a brick path snaking through, a bit like a child's puzzle. And we had the brick path with the mown sides to it, and then we had longer surrounding the path. So we had bulbs, mown path, bulbs. So it's really a pattern work of bulb planting, and that looks superb. And similarly, I've seen parterres. People have done parterres like that with sort of big triangular shapes with bulbs in, and it looks stunning. It's just a different show. Sometimes I'll do a path, I'll have a pathway, and I'll do a serpentine of bulbs licking the sides of the path down either side. And the Duchess of Beaufort, I think she used tulips beautifully at Babington House. She uses them, and she's just very careful and clever with her mixtures and colours. So they're all themed and they make a real hit. So just think about design, number one, before you even order your bulbs. Anyway, I've got my bulbs, and they came actually about a week ago, and I planted most of them last weekend. I just kept a few to show you. And you can see here, these are tulip Spitzbergen, which are mauve and white. And you can see they have actually started to shoot. Now, they've shot a lot more than when I got them because they keep them in the dark. And as soon as you bring them out into the light, obviously little shoots will start to grow and go green. So it is quite late, but they're not shriveled. They'll all survive, I'm sure. Now, a lot of us like perennial tulips. And so we want to plant them as deep as possible. So when you plant a tulip, if I planted just 3 inches or so below the ground, you can see these little droppers here on the side, the little bulbets. And if you plant them sort of in the top 3 inches, which is what the bulb growers do when they're propagating them, then they produce all these little side bulbs. Now, those side bulbs will come up and flower in about 2-3 years, but they are taking the energy from the main bulb. So if you want them to be perennial and that main bulb to go on flowering this year, next spring, the spring after, and so on, then you plant them a good 8 inches deep. And that way, these little droppers won't see the light of day, the bulbets. So if you want them perennial, plant them deep. And obviously certain types of tulips, certain varieties, are known to be much more perennial than others. So things like Purissima alba, Fusteriana Purissima alba, the white one, is a very good perennial one, as is Queen of the Night, as is Spring Green. And there's a lovely orange one, which is as well. So ballerina, that's right, it's the orange one. So, you know, you can check and see what ones are perennial, but plant them deep. And a lot of people order top-size bulbs, the really big tulips, when they plant them. Now, these aren't top-size, they're a bit smaller. I don't particularly mind that. When I have planted top-size bulbs, the first year they are huge and big, they're on steroids. But the next year, when they come out as a perennial, they'll be less big. And I actually think they look slightly nicer in many garden situations when they're not huge, stonking and steroidal like. So it takes your money and takes your choice. So I've got these tulips. I'm going to pop them in the hole. I'm going to plant them much denser than they say in the things. I'll probably get down at 8 inches. I'll probably get 4 in this hole. Push them into, just pop them into the bottom. Don't force them down because you can damage the base plate. And I'll do that. Get them in maybe 5. And then I'll just cover them up. Now, the big thing, as I mentioned before, is squirrels. Even if you don't think you've got squirrels, when you plant tulips, you'll probably find you have got squirrels. I don't know how they know, but they certainly do. So I'll just cover them in. I won't water them or anything like that. They'll have plenty. Now, what I'm going to do about squirrels, and you can see I've done that with the one I planted there, is I'm going to put a matchstick on top of the thing, there. And then I'm going to put a bit of this cayenne pepper over the top. Now, I don't know why, but they really hate cayenne pepper. Now, people have been told off putting cayenne pepper on squirrels. They have been told off. I could buy it in big bulk bags. It's a kilogram on Amazon for about £5, I think. Because they say that squirrels can get there and get it on their paws and rub their eyes and causes problems with their eyes. But I think they sense it before that. I've never seen any evidence of that, to be honest. And I put the matchstick there because 10 to 1, being in the UK, it'll be pouring down in 3 weeks' time. And I want to see if there's any left, and if there's none left, I'll just top it up. And again, that's the advantage of planting in January. I might top it up 2 or 3 times, whereas if I'd planted them back in October, November, you know, I'd have used a lot of chili powder. And as to density, I put in more bulbs every year, so I just add to this garden. So for, I don't know, 35 years, I've been adding more tulips. If I was starting from fresh, and this, I'd probably, in this bed here, which is probably 5 metres by 4 metres, I'll probably have 25, 30 bulbs, and I'll plant them in clumps where I wanted them of the tulips. So, so that's one thing about tulips. Now, the other thing, people are always talking about bulbs, is lasagne planting. And I thought that this was a lovely word and it sounds beautiful, but actually when I did a trial with doing some bulbs in a pot in lasagne planting, i.e. planting in layers above each other, with one bulb on each layer, maybe early, middle and lates. And then I did another container, exactly the same bulbs, but I shoved them all in together, which is a much quicker way to do it. Actually, there was no difference in performance at all. So I think lasagne is just a term that gardeners love, and so they think it's great, but actually you can just whack them in all in the same layer and you won't find any difference at all. To see more on my lasagne trial, have a look at my previous video. The other thing is when the tulips are finished flowering, what you do, you have the sort of dead head and the leaves starting to go brown. What you should do is you just pinch the head out so that it's not tempted to put all the energy into producing seeds. So you pull off the head, but you leave the leaves. And that's important, as with any bulb, because the energy will go out from the leaves and back to the bulbs, which is what you want so they can perform next year. The other thing is how you can use tulips. So I've obviously got them in the border here. I think they're also brilliant in meadows. In Highgrove, they used to use a lot in the meadows there, and the Duchess of Beaufort uses hers in meadows. In Highgrove, they got tulip flowers, so they had to stop planting for, I think it's something like 8 years it lives in the soil. But again, if you go onto the wholesalers, GT bulbs or similar, and you see meadow mixes or you see mix of tulips, you can get sort of mixes of purple, pinks and whites, or mixes of oranges and yellows. And those again are very cheap, end of season, get them into the meadow. And even if you don't get a lot of perennial planting, but you might well do because they're very free drain situations, and if you can get them in deep, then that's good. Then you might as well put them in because they do look, I think, phenomenal in meadows. Now I used a spade, as you notice. A lot of people use bulb planters. If you're going deep, obviously it's better to have a spade than a trowel. I find bulb planters a bit fiddly. To be honest, I actually prefer a spade. And I do like these trousers. I mean, they don't look the most sexy beast in the world, but they have got padded knee pads, and also they're waterproof and lined, so they're very, very warm. So, you know, you can be out here on a wet day, awful weather, you can be kneeling down and you are comfy and warm. So I think these Guinness trousers are amazing. So let's go and have a look at some other bulbs I'm planting now. So here I'm putting alliums. So I'm following the line of the arches with the alliums. Now alliums are really easy bulbs. Not many rodents, squirrels, anything eats that allium tasting foliage. So you don't really have any pest problems. Now I've planted allium globe master here. I've just got one left to do. And what they will do is they'll come up, and they'll come up in sort of May, late May, and they have massive big purple flowering heads. Many of the alliums are perennial. They just keep coming back. Many of them will seed. And after flowering, the foliage just sort of withers away. And at that time of year, come sort of Mayish, then obviously you've got lots of other perennials and things hiding all that spent foliage. So I think alliums are wonderful, and they really have taken everywhere by storm. I don't think I've ever put them in a meadow. I'm not sure that they would compete with grass, but you can use them in sort of nice big planting drifts in containers or whatever. So a wonderful selection to choose from. And I've often used the white ones as well, Mont Blanc, and there's another white one. And they seem to come slightly later. And I think they almost seem to last slightly longer, the flowers. But obviously the length of time a flower lasts for is tremendously dependent on the temperature. So if you have a cool, quite calm, late spring, then your tulips will go on and on forever seemingly. If it suddenly burns up and is really hot and dry, they'll flower and go over. So every year is different, but that's the wonderful thing about bulb, is that you can bring the changes every year, you can keep the interest going. Some years they'll be amazing, other years maybe not so amazing, but they're just fun to play with. So I'll quickly pop the allium in, and then we'll go and have a look at what we should be planting in turf areas if you want bulbs in turf. So I'm going down pretty deep. You can see it's a big bulb, so it's really not have had a chance to dry out, and it should be pretty healthy. Put it in and just put the soil back over the top. Press it down lightly, so you've got a bit of contact between the bulb and the soil, which is always good. Right, and let's go and have a look at the meadow. I suppose most gardeners use more bulbs in grass than any other way. Certainly traditionally we have always done that. So I've got these little fritillaria uva-vulpis, which I've never grown before, and I'm going to try them. They're bin ends, as it were, so I'm just going to stud them in the grass here. Now in this area I've got my longer grass with my wildflowers, and then I've got my mown paths between. Now in the longer grass I will be cutting that in sort of end of June, July, and so I have bulbs like Camasias in there. Don't do particularly well on this soil because they're quite dry, whereas at high grove they do really well, but they keep adding to them every year. And with some, if you're on very wet, moist soil, probably you could plant lots of Camasias, and I tend to use Quomarsh. There's several different types because it's shorter, and they will just regenerate and produce more and more and more. But on this soil I will add to them. I sometimes put tulips in here, as I mentioned. I put Fritillaria meleagris, and I always thought Fritillaria meleagris like very damp soils. We're very dry here, but it does amazingly well in this meadow, and I think it holds its own and bulks itself up as well. Iris, even the Dutch iris, are quite good in meadow situations. Normally they just hold their own, and then you can add to them each year, but they are very inexpensive to buy and they're lovely in a meadow. Obviously the daffodils go in here, so it's nice to have many different plants in here. But when you want to mow the grass and keep it more tidy looking, not the meadow situation, then obviously you're restricted in what bulbs you want, because you want the ones that come really early so that they've died down before you start mowing. Maybe you start mowing end of April, beginning of May, something like that. And if you don't like the untidy effect. So probably the number ones for that are things like winter aconites, which are sort of January coming out, maybe even a bit earlier, the lovely yellow flowers on them with the ruffs around them. Now, they are quite difficult to get established. I've been trying over the years and I got a few, but my mother had massive drifts of them and they just spread and spread and spread, and they came up, they were very cheerful in very early spring, and they died down way before you start to mowing. So they are brilliant. A head gardener I knew who had sheets of them said he produced them more of them by just cutting off the seed heads after they'd set seeds and sprinkling them on new areas where he wanted to introduce them. So they are probably my number one bulb for mown grass areas. Crocus thomasinianus particularly, are brilliant in mown areas. Again, they come up much earlier and they've died down really before you start mowing. Now, squirrels love crocus, so if you're going to plant them, you really need to put chicken wire over the top, because you'll be planting in presumably quite big drifts, and so you just put chicken wire over the top. And then when they've died down, you can remove it, because the squirrels only seem to take them, I think, when you've recently planted them, so they're excellent. Snowdrops can be quite good in sort of shaded grassland areas if you've got nice moist soil. And again, people say that they're much easier to move and plant in the green. You can actually buy them in the green. Oh, the Jack Russell's been chased by the chicken. You can buy them in the green, but they are more expensive. I tend to buy them dry, and you perhaps won't get such a good take rate, but they're pretty quick and easy to plant like that, and they're pretty inexpensive. I often just lift up clumps now. We've got them just coming through now, and I lift them up and I move them where I want them now before they flower in January. Some people say a good time to do this is actually in June, but I'm pretty sure the ones I've lifted now, you are not meant to be on the vegetable bed, chicken. I'll move you. So I often just lift them, put them in pots, and they look lovely on the kitchen table, and then I plant them out afterwards. If you're going to put daffodils in grass areas that you're going to mow, then really the little native daffodils, something like Narcissus pseudo-narcissus, the Lenten lily, I think it is, are the best. If you have the very big blousy ones, they take ages for their foliage to die down. And obviously, if you mow them before the foliage dies down, you're drastically reducing the vigour of the bulb. But the little ones die down much quicker, and you should leave them for a good 6 weeks after they've flowered, so the foliage has gone right down before you start to mow. So bulbs, I think, are a wonderful way to garden. It's not too late. Put your order in today, plant them in 2 or 3 days when they arrive, and you'll be so astounded by the results.